Welcome guys, gals, non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joe, I'm one of your hosts. With me as always is your other youthful co-host.
Brian, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Grant, I'm nearly 31, so I'm not very youthful.
Well, mainly I was like, I always start at near the top of the alphabet. I have a lot of B's, I think.
Right, okay.
And I was like, xylophonic, xenophobic, that's not fair. So I went for youthful. And you're youthful compared to someone who's older than you.
It's true, yeah. Everything's something compared to something that's more that.
I can see you're putting that philosophy degree to good use.
Yeah. I love it. I fucking hate people. You know,
yeah.
I really do.
I've noticed. There's a word for that.
So, like, I was saying to my family earlier, I was like, oh, in work, we launched this new product. And they're all like, they're suddenly incredibly, like, these people who, like, just don't have an opinion on anything I do until I find a way to criticize it. They're like, oh, actually, are you thinking about just redesigning the whole thing? And, actually, it's wrong for this reason. And why would you do it? And it's just like, shut the fuck up, everyone, please.
It makes you think of a couple of words, actually, that I was just thinking are probably quite Irish specific, or Hiberno English specific. Past remarkable, I don't think is a
I don't think
generic
that's
English phrase.
Is it not?
Past remarks, absolutely, but I'd say the adjective of someone, he's quite a past remarkable person.
You see, I'm very past remarkable, so yeah. I know that one.
And the other is a long word from Irish, plamassing, which is kind of the other side of that coin, which is basically kind of buttering someone up.
Yeah.
Which I use a lot.
Okay, here, let me give you the Buffy answer summary for the week, shall I?
Please do. For episode 12.
Nope.
Episode 13.
Episode 13 of
season 6 of Buffy Vampire Slayer, Dead Things.
Yeah, which was first aired on February the 5th, 2002. It was directed by James A. Contner, who last directed Spiral, but he also directed I Was Made to Love You. So, obviously relevant here. And it was written by Stephen S. DeKnight, who last wrote All the Way. And here is your Buffy summary. Warren seduces ex-girlfriend Katrina with a compulsion ray. When she comes to and threatens prosecution, he kills her. Shocked, Jonathan and Andrew help him by summoning time-distorting demons so that Buffy thinks herself responsible. She tries to turn herself in, beating up Spike and when he tries to stop her and upsetting Dawn. She remembers meeting Katrina and works it all out. She confides about her affair with Spike and Tara, who refuses to condemn her. A couple of issues there, and I'll come to one of them in a second because probably should have done this at the opening of the episode, but here's a little content warning for you. This episode, unfortunately, is quite a lot about sexual assault. So if you are just not into listening to someone talk about sexual assault today, or you feel like that's going to be super difficult for you, or even minorly difficult for you, fuck it. Not everyone wants to listen to that kind of stuff all the time, or any of the time, or some of the time. I would say maybe give this episode a skip, just generally. It's a dark episode. If you have watched that episode of Buffy, you're probably fine for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you haven't watched that episode of Buffy, and you're just listening to the podcast for some reason, you never know. Just give this episode a skip if you're not feeling that kind of content.
Yeah, you know yourself. Make sure you're in the headspace for it, because it is, as we're going to discuss, probably considered one of the darkest, if not the darkest episode of Buffy.
Yeah.
For a lot of real world content.
Yeah, I would say sexual assault and just general assault of women. So, yep, there you go. Anyway, so I would say it's very unusual that specific description didn't include the word rape. I mean, very important operative word there. And then secondarily, the time manipulation demons, that's a very bold claim, given we're very unclear as to what actually happens there with the Buffy and the time stuff. I kind of took it as being read that Warren was doing time manipulation shit, that they had some demons, or there were kind of illusions that Jonathan had conjured up or something. Yeah,
so I can give you a specific rebuttal on that point when we get to the demons. But I think a very kind of critically interesting, a critically sophisticated episode to talk about. And very dark, and in terms of its content, and definitely not one where, like, in the course of a short discussion or review of a 40-minute episode of Buffy, we're not going to be able to unpack all the complicated aspects of this with tremendous expertise, but we will, I think, be able to give kind of our 2021 reflection on what it reads like now and kind of how we think it impacts the show. But before we dive into that quagmire. Like skip over and do a bit of hand jiving in the bronze for our bronze banter.
Hand jiving is a bit of a loaded term there.
Yeah, I actually meant I'm doing the movements for Brian. I meant the dancing that Xander and Ong you were doing.
Yeah.
But it does do double duty. It does carry a heavy load in this particular context. But what we're going to talk about for bronze banter is a much lighter topic, which is slavery in America. Because we started watching a phenomenal new television show called The Underground Railroad, which is I think it's a little more your wheelhouse with Barry
Jenkins.
I was going to say Barry Jenkins, was like that. I know that's his name,
yeah,
but it felt like a fake name when I was saying it.
Yeah,
but if you can give us a bit of a capsule pitch of what the Underground Railroad, the TV show, is.
Sure. So it is it's a new TV show on Amazon Prime, streaming, I suppose. It's directed by Barry Jenkins. Every episode is directed by Barry Jenkins, which is really phenomenal because it's very unusual that you get one person directing an entire TV show, but you can tell. We've only watched the first episode so far. They're long episodes. They're 65 minutes long, some of them. Some of them are 47 or so. But they are very clearly a directorial piece. There are various writers through the episodes, but he has written quite a lot of them. Barry Jenkins, who you may know from his 2016 masterpiece, honestly, Moonlight, like probably the best gay movie of all time.
Yeah. We mentioned before that there was a short period, a couple of weeks, where we went to see Moonlight in Manchester by the Sea, and I have never seen you so fulfilled as a person. It was wonderful.
And he is, Barry Jenkins, very importantly, he's in a relationship with Lulu Wang, who directed and I think wrote, she might not have written, no, she did write it as well, The Farewell, which was the Awkwafina movie that we absolutely loved, with the grandmother, who's dying of cancer.
I do think Lulu Wang and Barry Jenkins feel like aliases you would give on short notice.
They're aliases you give on short notice, but they're also like the most perfect director names of all time, I would say. Anyway, so Barry Jenkins, he also directed If Beale Street Could Talk. So he's a black director and very clearly very, very inspired to make black movies, which, incredible. So the new TV show Underground Railroad is based on the 2016 novel, which won the also called The Underground Railroad, which won the Pulitzer Prize, I think, for writing that year. It did, and it was, I believe, nominated for it was longlisted for the Booker, which is unusual because obviously American texts reasonably excluded from Booker publications, and which was written by Colson Whitehead, who I actually don't know much of his stuff, and I am waiting a delivery of that book as we speak. It should be arriving today, actually. So yeah, it is a magical realist approach to the Underground Railroad, which was a system of abolitionists, and it very much was a system of people rather than a structure during mid 19th century Georgia and southern states where slavery was still legal and very much practiced, whereby you could help slaves, or slaves were escaping through a system of like-minded people, essentially. So
it's a metaphor, essentially.
In this text, however, the Underground Railroad takes physical instance. It manifests as a physical underground railroad, which, I mean, is just such a beautiful, those beautiful metaphors that are so blunt that a child could have written them, and they're so beautiful because a child could have written them.
As soon as you see it, it's right.
Exactly.
It feels right.
Yeah, so this is a literal railroad, and the first episode was very much in antebellum Georgia, where you have your plantation and slaves experiencing rape and assault,
like torture
and all that kind of stuff. All this stuff. Very much, though, at the same time, like, it doesn't feel like it's written for a wide audience. It doesn't feel like it's, look how awful this was. It's telling a story. I can't remember her name now. The main character is Cora. I can't remember the actor's name. I should look this up. I'll look it up in a second. She's absolutely stunningly phenomenal in it as a performance, and it's just like the first episode is reasonably straightforward with moments of magical realism and plenty of stream of consciousness, memory kind of fragmented through it, which is beautiful. And the second episode kind of takes that magical realist moment and runs with it, where they get to like a place in South Carolina, which is, the episode's called South Carolina, which is like a safe haven for Black people, where they are like, you know, seen as being worthy of education and all this stuff, and of course there's a dark underbelly to it, but it's
quite a little compelling sinisterness as well. That's not as, it's not blunt. It's that there's some actually, there's some, I was going to say there's some great performances. Like, we've watched 2 episodes so far. The reviews, the critical reception of the rest of the season seems equally as kind of impactful, and it is just a high quality piece of art.
I would say it's probably, those 2 episodes are 2 of the most visually sumptuous and immaculately constructed episodes of TV I've ever watched. Sorry,
Maybe wait until you stop joking to say you're joking.
So they're 2 of the most beautifully shot and directed visual episodes I've ever seen of anything. It's just stunning. And
the performances from everyone involved so far have been just so on point. But what brought me to that is, I think one of the most useful things that white actors can do in productions like this is to bring a realistic sinisterness and evil to those characters, because some of the unhinged and the really like the conviction that these white characters have for some of the, you know, eugenicist policies and
like
things like
that. Joel Edgerton's in it, who's generally like a leading man or a very sympathetic figure in texts, and in this he's trying to catch these runaway slaves.
Joel Edgerton, yeah, exactly.
And it's just I always wonder, like, it's so dangerous to get to like that kind of white knighting territory, literal white knighting in this instance, where it's like, oh yes, I will throw myself on the fire to, you know, graciously say the N-word repeatedly for the sake of this historical text, and look, I'm actually very brave for taking that onto myself. Yeah. But I do wonder, as an actor, like, how do you like how do you look at the people around you, like, after you get that shot, like, yeah, but how do you look at that white person afterwards, having like scream those epithets at you for like hours? I think part of it is being part of productions and part of content that is by for and about the people. Yeah. And basically, realistically, like, I mean, serving the role you're asked to serve in it. But I think the piece we're maybe missing hitting on here is that obviously there's tremendous amount of content in this period of history and in this theme, or in related themes set in more modern times. You know, obviously there's been a massive reason to and focus on kind of these kind of racial issues in America and more broadly, generally, and also over the last year. But with a lot of the critical response I've seen, which I've responded to as well, is that even when it's good, and even when it's well placed, and even when it's by Black creators, often there's an element of it's difficult, it's exhausting for anyone to watch. It's particularly exhausting to engage with. 12 Years a Slave, for example, like, you know, made by a Black director, but like, yeah, it's exhausting, and more so exhausting, of course, for a Black person.
Exactly, relatedly re-traumatizing, all this kind of stuff. And even stuff like Lovecraft Country, which we praised, while very, very good, like, has this element of like, it is a hot iron to hold continuously. And what so far is fascinating, what I think will continue with this, and why it feels like a burgeoning masterpiece, is that I saw one reviewer articulate it as that Barry Jenkins has done something wonderful and long sought after, which is really chart a path away from the pain of it towards the freedom, and that it being an opportunity to really showcase Black people in kind of full colour and vibrancy, where they're not defined by that situation. It's not
aspiring towards freedom, and
it's a very upwardly trajectoried piece of art, and something which Barry Jenkins did wonderfully with Moonlight, and which you really brought to my attention, is the fact that so often in productions, very often Black people aren't photographed correctly, or aren't lit correctly, or
like photo stock. I mean, film, like physical film that was created to capture moving images and still images was for so long developed specifically to complement white people's skin, so that when you came to photographing Black people, people just didn't know how to light them in a way that was complimentary, which is...
Or didn't make the effort to find out how to do it, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Black people fucking knew how to do it. But it's one of the most stunning things about TV shows like Atlanta or Lovecraft Country, and movies like Moonlight, absolutely. And This May Destroy You, is that what it was called? And that's
I May Destroy You?
I May Destroy You. I think This May Destroy You, they have a band. All TV shows where the director of photography knows a fucking thing about lighting black skin, which is just like, how the fuck did you get away with this for so long?
And something else which we've talked on, and I find it slightly hard to define at times with the magical realist piece, because there's elements of magical realism in some of David Lynch's work, but also in some of Neil Gaiman's work. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a difficult one to really isolate, but it's a slightly fever-like or dream-like quality, a kind of a blending of the metaphorical and the literal in a way which is sometimes unvoiced and unspoken, that runs through this.
Most specifically, magical realism as a literary genre in literature, most widely used by Gabriel Garcia Marquez in the 20th century. Really stunning author. I'm not a big fan. I don't like his work. I think it tends to be... I don't like family histories and like, or overly historical pieces, really. But I would say Beloved as a text, while being a horror, has a ton of magical realist elements to it, and that really influences this TV show. Yeah.
So compelling, to say the least. We'll be watching more of it. We'll be talking more about it, and so we might draw a close on that for the moment. But I would recommend, again, if you haven't seen Moonlight, that's a great primer mentally, I think, for the kind of space that this film is in.
It's also one of the best movies ever made, so treat yourself.
Generally, and a great gay film, and all the boxes: great cinematography, good music, etc., etc. Janelle Monáe's in that, is she?
She is indeed.
Yeah. So speaking of different,
and it rightfully stole the Oscar from La La Land.
La La Land, a great moment in human history. So speaking of dark and complicated themes in media. We return to Dead Things. So the two parallel directions of this episode that become actually, I thought, surprisingly interlinked, is that we see another one of the trio's hilarious slapstick kooky plots
schemes,
to create a cerebral dampener which they can use to turn quote unquote any woman into their willing sex slave, which I'll unpack that, but like, even in that phrase, it's such a contradiction in terms. Anyway, and this episode acts as a kind of bifurcation of the themes within the trio's kind of content, which is that we see, as many people have observed, we see the three of them react very differently to Warren's very deliberate plan to kidnap, revenge himself upon, really, and rape his ex-girlfriend who rejected him. And
as you pointed out while we were watching, like, this doesn't end in any way except for death. I mean, you have two options there. Either this person becomes your
prisoner,
your prisoner forever, or they escape through their own means, or you intend to kill them at the end. You don't let them go,
And so basically, we see that Warren is deliberate in his misogyny. He is very comfortable with the circumstances. He really thinks his reactions are always in terms of what he can get and how he can protect himself. I think it is probably reasonable to say that Andrew and Jonathan, while culpable, just have not thought maturely enough about a lot of this. They are obviously so quite juvenile, which isn't an excuse, but exactly that point I make, which is, I think it sounds like a hilarious teenage joke to them having a sex slave. It's weird science.
It's within the facileness of the phrase sex slave, which is like a term that gets bandied around amongst teen boys, nerd groups and stuff like this.
Princess Leia, weird science, all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. And you this episode is really the deconstruction of that notion of like, lol, imagine if this, and then when that happens, it is devastating and catastrophic.
Yeah, and just so we have a kind of a foundation to talk from, the second kind of arc being Buffy's kind of continued really kind of dissolution of self, her relationship with Spike, the degradation and self-loathing that she gets from it, coming to a point where she, thanks to Warren's influence, after Warren has killed Katrina, his ex-girlfriend, she believes that she has done this, how she reacts to that, how that reacts to her relationship with Spike, and ultimately the transition she gets when Tara confirms her there's actually nothing physically or metaphysically wrong with her. So it's a heavy episode. And in there, throw in there Willow's addiction issues are in there as well, because it's a very heavy episode.
And I think also very important to bear in mind there is the Dawn stuff. The Dawn stuff is quite upsetting.
Yeah.
And again, Michelle Trachtenberg is actually quite good in this, where she kind of vacillates between hopeful that, she kind of seems like happy that Buffy wants to hang out with her, because there's a point in the episode where Buffy comes home after having sex with Spike, I want to say. I can't remember what she's doing. And she gets home, she's talking to the crew, and Xander showing Dawn how to dance, and Buffy's like, oh, I'm looking forward to just a nice evening in watching some movies with my sister. And her sister's like, I have plans. Because Buffy hasn't been keeping track of Dawn. And it's a hard one because Buffy is, from the outside perspective, busy with work and slaying, but realistically she's also putting a lot of time towards spending time with Spike. So there's obviously a guilty implication there, but Dawn seems quite hopeful to hang out with Buffy, and then kind of, says well, you're never right, I can't exactly plan to hang out with you. But and then towards the latter half of the episode, when Buffy is planning on turning herself in to the place because she thinks she has killed someone, I have no idea how she was even going to explain that, to be honest. I was fighting some demons and I knocked this girl off the side of a ravine and she died.
I think but this is something that Spike highlights as well, that sounds insane.
But Dawn at that point is like, Buffy's saying, I have to do this, and Dawn saying, you're just abandoning me.
Leave me again. It's a great narrative moment because you want to construct stories where there's no obvious bad guy in a way. People often do things, people often get themselves down conversation trees in real life where, and I think, where they can't make a decision which is necessarily a good one for everyone. They're kind of responsible, but they're also kind of the victim themselves. They are suffering, but they're also making other people suffer as well. It's a really important part of the conversation with anything where someone is self-destructive, either in terms of their self-esteem, in the way Buffy is, or the stuff that's going on with Willow. Is you can both need help and also be causing problems. So if we start off maybe looking at the instigating incident with Warren, and Brian, you were saying to me off mic that you agree with Warren and you think that he's the hero of this episode. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that? Yep.
But yeah, no, it's I don't know what more to say about it. There's really it's very clear in Warren that this has existed throughout his portrayal.
Absolutely.
And absolutely in I Was Made to Love You, where he imbues, he kind of does a reverse instance of this, where he imbues agency onto someone and abandons them because of it and leaves them to rot essentially, and then tries to get Buffy killed because of it. That kind of says everything you need there. And yeah, I think it's a very strong it's a very strong message in what it communicates about this kind of culture, about this kind of nerd culture where it's very, very insularly and very weakly masculine. And that's not actually, I don't actually think there's anything masculine about the way they're interacting. Masculinity and femininity obviously being, when taken in, it's a
mishmash of poorly understood concepts of quote unquote masculinity.
Exactly.
Essentially.
I think that kind of misogyny really exists so extensively in that kind of group. I definitely have seen it over the years, where specifically where I wasn't read as a queer person, that men, when grouped together thinking that they are nerds who are underserved and unfairly shit upon, they will 100% turn to misogyny almost every single time, and homophobia realistically. So I think this episode really communicates that in a really effective way, where it is taking that specific, very easygoing trope that we've perceived as very easygoing trope as lol sex slave, and gaming that out to where there's like, I think there's like a real shatter in the Buffy text in the moment where Katrina says the word rape, you know, that word coming into this, I don't think that word's been used, or it probably has been used once or twice in the show before.
I can't think of when, but I also was surprised it was articulated so specifically.
Well, the way she says it is so like, it really rings in the air because it is, none of the characters involved really saw it as such, because they do see her as being appropriately subservient, or she should be subservient to them essentially. So when she says that, they're like, no, we're just doing what is ours or what is appropriate, and that is like, it's such a crushing moment in the text, I think, and it's such a weighted moment. And then her running away and being killed by Warren, and in such a, like, that thud. Oh, I really felt that in the bottom of my spine when Warren hits her over the head with the champagne bottle, I have to presume. And she just crumples to the floor. There's no dramatic music. There's no dramatic note to it. There's no real explosion of it. It's a very dull thud of the head.
Yeah,
it's well done. Sorry, we actually never said it at the beginning of the episode. I think this episode's good. It is far from one of my favorite episodes. I think it's the Buffy Spike stuff is in some ways necessary and in some ways really excessive. I think there's a better way to communicate stuff like that about Buffy without going to this extreme and without that kind of mishmash of pandering towards Spike fans and also saying what's happening here is gross, where they don't know which way they're pulling themselves as a show. But overall, I think it's a very well written episode. I think the performances throughout were like next to none. They were so good.
Yeah, you can kind of look away from this episode, you know, which
100%.
is a point in its favor.
But yeah, no, it's just that, like, it is a shattering moment of the Buffy text. It is very clearly they were taking the show in a very different direction to previous seasons. And I think thankfully it's also a tension breaker for the season because it's very declarative. The episodes that follow on from this follow in the stead, you know.
Tension maker, really.
Well, no, it follows in the stead, but the tension. A different kind of tension
building to something, and this is the shift.
Well, no, I wouldn't even say it was a tension building to something. I meant like more like an internal tension where previously it wasn't quite sure what it was doing. It was doing Willow addiction stuff, but also Double Meat Palace. It was doing Buffy Comes Back from Hell, but also we're singing. Which, in fairness, that tension really worked.
Yeah, but it's a collection of different ideas. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is a really unifying moment where it says, oh, this is what we're doing, and the rest of the season really pushes towards that. Like, in only a couple of episodes' time, we're going to be doing Seeing Red. Hell's Bells obviously being a silly, but also quite sad and dark episode. So yeah, it's a moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's something very interesting where the Buffy really sharply delineates slaying in all its forms from murder. And we've often debated, like, you know, sometimes it's a little ambiguous how they make that decision, because even like in the Angel episode this week or similarly, you see monsters which I think they might just be guys on their masks, you know. But with Katrina, I think we see, similar to when Tara dies, similar to when the deputy mayor dies, there's a lack of a sound effect. It's very much like it's a very grounded, very uncomfortably real moment.
Go ahead. Well, speaking of the deputy mayor dying, whose name I should really remember, Alan?
I think they only call him the deputy mayor for ages, and then I think it might be. I think it is. I know it is Alan, but I don't think he ever gets the last name. So
I've been struggling all morning to try to think of a word for this, and basically, this episode is a great example of extreme intratextuality. So heavy references to other instances within the text. Is that right, do you reckon?
Yeah, 100%.
Intertextuality. Because intertextuality means between texts.
It does, yeah.
Okay. So I think that's all exemplified really well in a great resource that we got this week from one of our Twitter followers, Shiny Red Ukulele on Twitter. Thank you very much. Who sent us a really, really extensive Tumblr post specifically, and highlighted that I should be the person reading it because I'm the person who knows shit about stuff like this.
Well, they know for a fact that you can read, so
that's true. So it's from Tumblr called The Sub Lemon. And we'll tweet this out, this link, because it's really good. Actually, we'll just retweet
Yeah,
tweet. But basically it goes extensively into the intertextuality moments of the episode. So it kind of goes from like through the reflections of Ted in this episode, where Buffy is turning herself in a moment where like she basically sees herself as morally required to do, quotation marks, the right thing. It references consequences extensively. So with Faith saying I took care of it, Spike saying I took care of it. The Tumblr post, and there are 2 parts of it, and it's 1900 words in total, which is fucking mad. But it's also like just very well written for a Tumblr post, I found. Yeah. Like the Tumblr post, like if you see a big wall of text on Tumblr, you're like, oh crap, it's going to be nonsense.
You want to borrow space, yeah.
Exactly. But this was actually like reasonably academically written. But it goes through consequences where you have like Faith kind of saying things like I took care of it. And the Tumblr post specifically goes into verbal and linguistic callbacks and call forwards as well, because you obviously have things like in this episode, Spike says I love you and Buffy says no you don't, which is obviously the inversion of what Buffy and Spike say in Chosen. Yeah. Or there's also plenty of references to the gift. So when Buffy says Donnie I have to do this, again in this episode that's what Buffy said to Dawn when she was about to jump off in the gift. Plenty of references to the Sanctuary and the episode before Sanctuary on Angel, which I can't remember now the name of. Maybe 5x5? No, that was the Buffy equivalent, wasn't it? Something in Sanctuary. But where Faith starts pummeling Angel, saying like I'm broken, I'm awful, I'm disgusting, basically. And Buffy is enacting that onto Spike while clearly feeling that about herself, that she has no soul, she's broken, she's empty. And
compelled in large part by the fact that she feels she's done essentially what Fate did, which is kill a human without any context or justification.
Exactly. And then additionally, something that Mark Field also highlights is just the dream that Buffy has about, and it's a much lesser dream to most Buffy dreams, which is unfortunate, but where Spike takes the place of Katarina, and then she goes to stake Katrina. I keep
become very Russian with your pronunciation.
I know, it's just because I keep like being like it can't be Katrina because Katrina's an Irish name, and it's reasonably uncommon.
It's Katarina,
it's reasonably uncommon in the US. Anyway, so
well, there was a whole hurricane about it, to be fair.
True, and she goes to stake Spike, and he turns into Katrina, etc. So it's really
very trippy, actually.
Huh?
It's very trippy.
It is quite trippy. Yeah. So obviously Katrina comes to represent the darkness that Buffy is experiencing internally, that she is forced to externalize visually because she cannot process it, and it's very much implied in all of her actions around Spike and how she treats Spike as being this aberration because he is a walking embodiment of the aberrance that she feels in herself. Anyway, really recommend, if you want to deep dive into this episode specifically, it's just genuinely really good. Recommend reading it.
Just while you're on the point of that kind of time skip, they do actually specifically explain that it's Rashundi demons that they summon, and they're very rare, and they cause a localized disruption to linear time.
Okay.
So if you spend more than a few minutes around them, you get time bendy hallucinations. So that actually is a physical thing that Andre presumably incorporates. And we also have, it's very much how Warren Shanghai's, that's a term I definitely should look up to see if that's racialized in any way, but press gangs him into doing his work for him, or being part of the problem, because he makes Andrew summon these demons to help cover and implicate Buffy.
And Jonathan
to turn into Katrina and do some real trippy like laughter and rolling about stuff as her, but so they're very much embroiled in it. And
actually, the one note I'd say about this episode is actually specifically bad. Is there's a sting towards one of the ad breaks comes, and it's Katrina looking at Buffy from behind a bush, and it's like, oh my god, is Katrina alive? And like you find out moments later it's actually Jonathan, and Buffy rarely does that kind of very cheap ad break moment.
Yeah, 100%. And then when Jonathan comes back, he's clearly been crying through his mascara. So there's like a lot of like as Jonathan, I'm being literal about that. So there's a lot of like implication and power dynamics and stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think the final real big point to touch on for this episode is just the extensive Spike and Buffy sequences. So most famously, Buffy is hanging out with her friends in the bronze. They're practicing dancing for the wedding. Willow goes dancing with Anya and Xander in a really lighthearted moment. Buffy feels very alone and very distant from her friends, obviously, because she's experiencing all this internal trauma. So she goes up onto the bleachers, I don't know, the rafters,
I would say.
Yeah. And she's looking down on her friends, and Spike comes along and basically starts to penetrate her and says, no, watch your friends while I'm doing this. You know, you're here with me, you belong in the dark, and your friends are in a different world, basically. And while James Marsters does an amazing job there, I think I have rarely heard a line delivered so externally to a character.
Yeah.
It did not read like Spike was saying that at all. It was very much an externalized vocalization of what Buffy was feeling. I don't think that would be an approach that Spike would ever take in attempting to seduce or control or anything Buffy. It just didn't read. Yeah,
100%. And I think we've read that Sarah Michelle Gellar said this is one of the main things in this arc that she most disagreed with or was unhappy with, because there's no situation she felt Buffy would do that in front of her friends, no matter what kind of position she was in mentally. So yeah, it's another one. It's as we said before, there's a real tension where when Buffy and Spike are having sex and she's actually having a conversation with him and they're kind of chatting a bit, it's actually kind of charming, you know?
Yep.
And I think there's there's real tension between, okay, Spike is this negative influence for her, and he's arguably taking advantage of her at her lowest moment and kind of manipulating that as kind of abusive people do. But it doesn't write that Spike is really trying to do that in a really malicious way. It kind of writes that he can't help doing it in a way, like where she does confront him and beat the crap out of him. He's after getting rid of, or trying to get rid of Katrina's body, and again, like a weird, cheap comedic moment, he's like, they're standing outside the police station, he's like, don't worry, they'll never find the body, and then the police walk out and they're like, we found a body down by the river, and he's like half a mile from the cemetery, he's like, oh fuck.
Yeah, it's a weird one, because there's moments where Spike, I think, is portrayed much more like he's been portrayed in recent episodes, especially since Buffy came back, where he's, well, not so much. What was the episode where he did stuff that was really, really bad? I think it was the one right after Tabula Rasa. Can't remember which episode it was now. So, but you have Spike like taking that, like beating up from Buffy on the chin because he knows that she needs to, basically, and then also the like doing that with the body, where he, like, that's much more like what Spike would be characterized to do, where he is doing something genuinely, trying to do something selfless and considerate for the person in front of him, but doesn't know what to do right because there's a moral confusion around him, rather than, I think he's trying to do the right thing but he doesn't know what the right thing is, and that's a very different moral space to, you know, telling Buffy to watch her friends as he like fucks her, you know? I
often think there's a horror space they could have explored more with that, because I think if you follow that vector, with someone I've always found interesting with the Vampire Without a Soul, where it's like if you follow that vector of someone could, like, if he was to like dig up Joyce and dress her up and be like, but your mother's back, isn't that what you want? And just really not understand it.
It's that kind of like that thing where you get like, I'm trying to think what texts are in it, but like, I think there might be some mutant at some point in X-Men where it's a very powerful child doing really horrific things, not understanding why the people around them aren't happy with it, basically.
Come through Twilight Zone.
True. But that's definitely a trope, and that would be a really good one here. But instead you kind of get this kind of confused, mixed approach to Spike, I think. And Spike at this point is just performing whatever role is needed of Spike in a scene. He feels like Wolverine in X-Men in the noughties.
Absolutely agree. And something I don't want to overlook either in terms of the other directions of the episode is that Willow tragically is making a lot of progress, and she's in 32 days out of magic, and her and Tara are at a point where that could possibly be a positive thing for them in their interactions. Specifically,
because you can tell that because towards the end of the episode, when Willow and Tara are interacting, when Tara is leaving, it feels like it's going to be a sour moment of like, this is awkward, and she says, well, see you, Will, or good luck with that, Will, or whatever, and it's very much in a moment of comfort, of familiarity, which is great.
Yeah, and what's important for Tara, which I want to highlight because we'll unfortunately not be seeing very much more of her, is that she plays a very important role in terms of comforting Buffy, and specifically investigating the magic used to resurrect Buffy, and making it clear to her, it's like, no, as we previously discussed, and we were kind of trying to figure this out, that when her essence was funneled back to the mortal plane, her atoms are slightly out of sync, and she describes it as being similar to a metaphysical sunburn. So that's why Spike's sensors, or whatever, which I thought was a great phrase from Tara, aren't reading her as human, but it's a technical fault. It's not a material issue.
I would say that scene is probably my like highlight of the episode in terms of, I think it's probably the strongest emotional moment of this season so far, is Tara consoling Buffy and saying, I'm not going, like, you know, Buffy's told Tara about Spike, hoping that Tara will tell her she's disgusting, how dare you, why would you do this? And instead, Buffy finds in Tara someone who will not judge her, who will try to understand her, be compassionate. And it's so appropriate that it's Tara, as in, I think that Tara is unfortunately chronically underwritten in this show in so many ways, and underperformed. In season 6, she's been Amber Benson's been playing Blinder, and the writers are being great with her, where they're giving her agency, and highlighting her in this episode as someone who will not judge Buffy for her personal life, because clearly, like, as a queer person, that's one of the things, and who is compassionate and wants to see the thing from that person's perspective. There's no other character who would be able to do that. If you wrote Xander into that scene, awkward. If you wrote Willow into that scene, there's other implications and other awkwardnesses. I think Tara's the absolutely ideal person to have there, and I'm really glad that Amber Benson got to portray that in this episode, because I think it was well within her ability, and should have been used much more extensively in seasons 4 and 5. But it's a very touching moment. Tara refuses to condemn Buffy for it, and I think that the line that Buffy like ends the episode on is tell me I'm wrong, or what was it? Yeah,
she's basically like, I have to be wrong, please don't forgive me,
like very clearly echoing that scene with Angel and Faith. But it's Sarah Michelle Gellar, full breakdown mode. I shed a little tear. Please don't forgive me, like, Jesus fucking Christ, our heroine has fallen so far.
Absolutely,
it's a really strong moment. It's very good. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything I want to say about that. I would say there's plenty of conflation in this episode between sex and death, and that's always fascinating. And we've talked about it quite a bit previously in the podcast, and I'm sure you can come to your own conclusions about it, because I have not prepared any. Okay, let's do the dusting. So, Joe, do you have any Buffy bits for us?
We see more of these kind of vague nerd references from the trio. So we have them fighting with lightsabers at one point when Katrina breaks free, and just like a vague general homophobia of like, put down your sissy stuff when you girls are finished touching each other. Bizarre. And that we see this interesting kind of mix of magic and technology, because they use a demon's musk gland to empower the cerebral dampener, which is like an interesting genre blending, I think, that Buffy as a TV show often does.
Okay, and I have a couple of Buffy bits for you there, even Joe, though you didn't ask, Joe, because you're very rude.
Agan Bush has a very hairy chest as well. I noticed that, which is unusual in this universe. Very few hairy men in this universe.
True. Yeah, I highlighted Sarah Michelle Gellar found the balcony scene to be very uncomfortable and out of character. And apparently, specifically, Stephen DeKnight has said that he didn't come up with that idea, that Whedon specifically
said it was going to happen.
Said it was going to happen, and I have it there, and I was like, and he insisted on it. And it doesn't say that in the quote that he has in that, but in my brain, Whedon insisted on that to some degree. I don't think it's an inherently misogynistic scene. I think it's interesting that kind of scene, which I would highlight as being very out of character for the character and very uncomfortable. I think in reflection of everything about Joss Whedon recently, not too shocking altogether. Apparently Tara was initially supposed to respond to Buffy when she's saying this about Spike, and and this was filmed, they have it on the dailies, so the dailies being the
raw footage
from each day. She was supposed to say, she had responded, "Sweetie, I'm a fag, I've been there," which I found fucking bizarre. And
this might be a swing for the fences, but have you ever heard a woman refer to themselves as a fag?
Rarely. Trans women sometimes do.
Okay, yeah, but like not in the kind of the context that I think Tara would have been saying here. Like that really,
it reeks of there not being a lesbian in the room, right in that.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe it was more of a thing in the 90s, but I don't think so.
Maybe, but like
I watched a lot of like Queer as Folk which had been coming out at the same time, which had quite a reasonable amount of queer women in the cast. No, sorry, not in the cast. Actually, specifically not in the cast, but in
the character,
in the
dramatis personae.
Exactly, and I don't think any of them ever refer to themselves as fags. Anyway, and another thing is that there's a Bush song playing in this. Bush of Gavin Rossdale fame, who was married to, what's her name, Gwen Stefani for years. I think they have divorced at this point, but Bush were a corporate sellout, shitty, like basically post grunge band who just were bad. The song in this is Out of This World, and I'm pretty sure it had Stevie Smith reference because at one point he says, "Are you waving or are you drowning?" Which is, not waving but drowning, which is the Stevie Smith poem. Anyway, I think that's all my Buffy bits. Do you have any fashion notes there, Joe?
Warren dresses very much like Chandler or a 90s lesbian when he goes to try and pick up women with his cerebral dampener. He has like his
horrible green
poorly fitting suit and massive luminescent green shirt, and the three of them, when they're using the cerebral dampener, put on these kind of sunglasses that you would see like, I don't know, like Sum 41 wearing or something. These kind of like really
Alien Ant Farm,
you kind of orange material wraparound glasses. Awful. We see more of Buffy's double meat palace uniform, so she's still working there, which I think is relevant. And also we see Willow wearing the in this episode the black kind of boxy jacket, which becomes synonymous with Dark Willow later in the season. Yeah,
I think also worth noting is Buffy's green kind of like off the shoulder top. I'm not sure what you call those tops where you have the like shoulder, the arms kind of hanging down off the shoulder, and you have kind of a boat.
Halter, is that?
No, halter top is a totally different thing. But basically, like, it kind of gives you a bit of a boat neck.
We've established I know nothing about this area of fashion.
Yeah,
but I keep talking.
It says something about brownies and a brownies troop on it, but it was bizarre, and it's very green. I thought Anya looked great in the episode when she was dancing and stuff. She just looked very full of life and young. And I also thought it was very interesting that Buffy, when she's preparing to really do the ultimate punishment onto herself and self-hatred onto herself by turning herself into the police, she's wearing her brown leather trench coat. And I saw a very interesting TikTok recently, which I'm not sure if we shared on Twitter, and I think I've lost it by this point because TikToks are impossible to find after you've watched them, but which was about how this TikToker reckoned that Buffy generally trended towards basically dressed the way she dresses communicates who she's closest to at the time. So when she was dressing in dungarees, she was close to Willow. When she's dressing in leather jackets, originally she was very close to Angel. And this point where she's very close to Spike, she's dressing in she basically takes on Spike's dress style at that point. So that's interesting. And yeah, I think that's all my fashion notes. What's the death count, Joel?
So Katrina Silber, murdered by Warren Mears.
Yep.
And 3 Rushundi demons murdered variously or slayed variously by
Buffy and Spike. Great. Okay, and a rating, Joel. Do you have a rating for this episode?
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult one to rate, isn't it? I am going to say 8.7 off-brand lightsabers.
I was going to say 8.7 group things. That's the second episode in a row that we've rated something the same.
We're drifting. We're
exactly
drifting
the same out of 100 points. But I was specifically thinking 8.7.
There you go. Yeah. Great. Yeah, I think it
has a lot of worth to it.
It has a lot of worth. It's a lot of critical worth to it. It has, by and large, a lot of great acting.
I think it has notes of misogyny.
Yeah, notes misogyny textually and also probably in the writing as well.
But it also has condemnation of misogyny.
Yeah, it doesn't do everything right, but it does a lot of things well.
Yeah, and the acting performances, I think, throughout were very, very, very good.
Yeah, so I think that carries it for me.
And I think for me, unfortunately, though, that final scene with Tara is a Buffy-centered scene and not a Tara-centered scene. I think it would go on my favourite Tara scenes in the show. I
agree.
Okay, let's move on to the Cordelia Chase.
Yeah, fun episode over.
Really good episode.
Cordelia Chase is waiting in the wings. It's
silly and horny as well.
Very silly, very horny. I'm seeing a lot of crossover between what's happening in Buffy and Angel thematically week on week at this period of the show's histories. I would have actually thought this episode would even have happened earlier, but it's very much not a concept of the week, a trap of the week, a dungeon of the week episode.
Yeah, sure.
They all decide to go to the
in the same way that Are You Now or Have You Ever Been was, in the sense that like it's self-contained but very much a notable episode.
Yeah.
So it was written and directed by Joss Whedon. So
yeah,
that's the
and
context.
it feels like that in a good way. They go to a ballet because Angel remembers seeing this ballet company 100 years ago. They made him cry, even though he was a vampire monster, soulless demon at the time. Everyone gets dressed up. It's really a let's get dressed up and go to the opera episode. There's a lot of great dynamics. We have this kind of suddenly burgeoning thing of like everyone being so horny for each other because both Gung and Wesley are into Fred, and Angel is really into Cordelia.
There's a really farcical moment where there's a really farcical moment where Cordelia and Amy and Fred are talking, and Fred's like, "Oh, do you think?" And Cordelia's like, "Yes, he's definitely into you." And Cordelia's communicating about Wesley, and Fred is asking about Gunn. And it's a real like classic sitcom moment of just like one small presumption leading to badness.
There's a lot of that happening, yeah. So they go to the company, and there's it's this Russian ballet company, two actors who are focused on doing very broad Russian accents, who are American actors, but the premise basically being that it's this wonderful performance of Swan Lake, I want to say.
Oh gosh, I didn't take that in. Probably Swan Lake.
Yeah. And Angel is like, it's not just the same production, it's literally the same people and the same actors and all that. What magical mystical thing is happening? The prima ballerina is played by Summer Glau, who is most well known for being River Tam in Joss Whedon's Firefly.
This is her first acting role.
It's her first acting role. I'm nearly certain that's correct. It's definitely one of her earliest acting roles. And they go to investigate this, and the thrust of it being that the Count, who is in the box watching her, he was in love with her, found out she had a lover, went into a jealous rage and trapped her in this time bubble to dance not only just the same production but the exact same night performance for 100 years. The
part that I found most enraging was when she's like, yeah, he doesn't even really like ballet.
I think that was fantastic. I thought that was fantastic. She gets a speech at the end of the episode where she's watching herself from the wings, waiting in the wings, and saying that I've done this every night and all that kind of stuff. And Angel talks to her, and it's a great moment because she gives a great speech, very wistful. Angel gets an opportunity for the first time in a while to feel alien, in the sense that vampires should feel alien, where he kind of does relate or understand or have some semblance of the melancholy that she has, and he creates an opportunity for her to dance a new ending to the show and die basically and disappear. But like that moment where he's like, yeah, he's obsessed with me, but he doesn't even notice I trip every time. Like he's not even like an expert and really into ballet. Was really interesting.
That whole scene felt very Joss Whedon written.
Yes,
in a good way.
Absolutely. And I made the argument to Brian that I think that this episode ends with a couple of come downs. One is that Gung and Wesley both build themselves up to kind of tell Fred that they're into her throughout the episode, and the way it kind of thematically is linked with the kind of the scoring lover stuff from the actual plot. Eventually Fred and Gunn kiss and get together, which I actually do not remember. Wesley is kind of implicitly rejected by that. And also Angel builds up the courage to tell Cordelia that he genuinely wants a relationship, and then the sting at the end being that the Grusalug from Lauren's dimension, Gru, has come back and she gets back with him. Rule of
thirds, like, you know, they have like the same plot enacting itself 3 times within the episode. Beautiful.
100%. But the middle part of the episode where they're all fantastic friends, they're all fighting at kind of their strengths. Like Wesley, you really see from Wesley when they kind of are fending off with swords like 20 monsters. He is commanding people, he is directing them, he's fighting well. Everyone's at the tip top of their powers, everyone is together, and it's from this that the show goes downhill, not necessarily in quality, but in terms of there's always a point in shows like this where people are never as much friends as they were ever again, and people start to fall out with each other.
Episodes previous to Passionate and Buffy, basically.
100%. And so in terms of horniness, like there's a scene where Joss Whedon sometimes is like, if an episode is good, let's write it a couple of times, because there's a scene where they're trapped in a room with the kind of the spirits of dead lovers, or the energy of the dead lovers, and Ancient Cordelia.
And a hot spot, they refer to it.
A hot spot. And they are just fucking, like, they are just going at it. And it's really explicit. There's a lot of, like, you see them talking about him inserting into her. You see them mounting. And there's a lot of specific discussion of Angel's erection. Like, it's bizarre in context. Not bad. And it's passionate, yeah.
It's well written. It's funny.
Yeah, and it's a great episode for Cordelia and Chris McCarpenter. Like, this is very much Cordelia is Lauren articulates it to Angel. Cordelia is now a champion in the same way that he is. They're peers. Like, she is kicking ass, directing him. You know, she is the hero saving people as much as he is, which I nice. Love as an arc for
especially because it feels like she's been escalated in the same way that Willow is escalated within the Scooby Gang, where Willow is, you know, arguably the most powerful person there, along with Buffy. It feels like at this point Cordelia is the deuteragonist.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, so I liked it. I think I have a lot of things I liked about it. I think it's a classic episode of Angel. And I think to Greg on a curve with the preceding episodes. I think maybe an 8 feminist gestures.
I was going for 9. I was going to go for 9.
Yeah.
I have very little to say bad about it. It was stupidly horny, but you know.
Maybe I'm going to stick with 8 because I like to not facilitate. But I think I was almost surprised by how good it was. I was like, you know, it just kind of came out of nowhere.
This would be up for me in the top 10 episodes of Angel.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go to 9. But yeah, I enjoyed it. An enjoyable and engaging week of Buffy / Angel.
For sure.
All around.
Well, I wouldn't say Buffy was enjoyable, but definitely engaging.
Yes.
Great.
So thanks so much for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. We're always
I hope you enjoyed that. That's how we end this, right?
Yeah, I don't know. How do you wrap up talking about dead things, you know? Thanks so much for being with us this week. Glad to have you here. If you enjoyed or were interested by the episode, tell your friends, tell your shift supervisor at the Double Meat Palace, Brenda, and we will both see you next week right here on
Buffy
Take Us Away,
Boys.
Brian.
Oh,
Buffy
what?
Boys. I was like, take us away.
Oh, take us away, Buffy Boys.
See ya.
Bye.